And away we go. Welcome to Three Guys in an iPad, the proverbial water cooler of the mortgage and real estate industry. I am Brian Rieger. I'm one of the three guys here with the iPad. I'm the co-founder of Content Beacon, and I also run a little shop called True Impact Communications. And I'm joined, as always, by the other two guys. We'll start with Rick Grant, my co-founder at Content Beacon. He's also the owner of RGA PR, and you've probably read one of his articles in any one of multiple trade publications. Rick, how are you doing?
Doing great, Brian. Glad to be here as always.
Glad to have you here. And of course, we couldn't go on without our third member here. That's Kevin Breeland. He is a certified mortgage banker. He is the past president of Respro, and he is currently hunkered down in Texas, in Austin, in Amplify Credit Union. Kevin, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
We love your hat too, by the way. It's a good look, especially since it covers part of your head. So
yeah,
good thing.
Yeah, it works
outstanding.
Well. This is the biggest size I had.
So this is the part in the show when we do a shameless plug for the producer, Content Beacon. That's the industry's only B2B content marketing agency. So if you like anything about what you're seeing here and you'd like something like it for your own brand or blogs or white papers or you name it, just get in touch with Rick or me. And of course, in regards to the show, never mind Content Beacon, if you'd like to be a guest here on Three Guys in an iPad, or you have an idea, or you just like us to shut up for a change or whatever, just go ahead and email me at brian@contentbeacon.com or rick@contentbeacon.com. And with that, we've got a slightly different kind of podcast here today. And of course, we're recording this on March 20th. You're probably going to see this a little after that. But if you think back to March 20th, right about now is where things are really breaking with the coronavirus, COVID-19. So we want to set a moment aside here just to acknowledge that it's a pretty serious, pretty somber time, definitely something historical or historic, I should say. And we're being told now it's only going to get worse. So our thoughts and prayers go out to all of those who have been affected. And I think we want to try to, again, we may inject a little humor at times, but please, by no means, if we do add some humor at some points or another, it's kind of our bunker humor, I guess. And by no means are we taking this lightly. So we are primarily a mortgage and real estate podcast. So let's take a look at the impact on the industry. And I'm going to hit the peanut gallery up here with two pretty tough questions, and they're pretty vague. They're pretty wide, and we're talking about something pretty nebulous and fluid right now in COVID-19. Gentlemen, though, how is COVID-19 going to affect the mortgage industry in the short run? And if that's not enough to chew on, how do you think it'll affect it in the long run?
Well, I'll start. I can tell you that the effect that you're seeing right now is an enormous amount of uncertainty in the financial markets. And when I say uncertainty, I'm talking about volatile swings that are just incredible in single days. So for an example, today is Friday, March 12th. So 14 days ago would have been March 6th, right? On March 6th, I was locking 30-year loans at 3%. That same 30-year loan today would be 4.25%. And since then, since March 6th, we've had the Fed lower the rate to banks to almost zero. We've seen a tremendous amount we've seen the 10-year fall to below 1%. I mean, we've seen a lot of things that historically hasn't happened in the past. Yet with that, we have seen the Dow Jones drop 9,000, almost 10,000 points in 2 weeks or a month. And we saw the entire mortgage-backed security market get flooded with refis to the extent that everybody was max capacity, which prompted one rate increase just to slow down the refi flood. But now your real problem is valuation. What is the real value of mortgage-backed securities? What's the real value of the treasuries? When everything is at zero, what is the value? And so the federal government really is doing, in everything that I've read, most of the pundits totally agree that the federal government is doing everything they need to do. They're taking all the steps to prop up the economy, to keep it propped up, because for the first time in my 41-year career, we're having an economic outcome that is not self-induced. We have not had bad loans being made that caused the market to fall. When I first started in the business in 1979, fixed rate mortgages were 19.5%, prime rate was 22. And then we saw a period of time, October, Black Monday or Black Tuesday, 1987. In one day, I had 3 customers that were trying to lock in at 9, ended up locking in at 12.5 before it jumped to 14 in the one day.
Oh.
And 2007, I can remember when I was relocating from Anchorage, Alaska to Charleston, South Carolina, and I was driving. There's 3 days through Canada where I had no cell service. When my cell phone turned on, I had 132 messages, of which most of them were about programs we no longer offered 10 days ago, that we offered 10 days ago, that we couldn't offer any longer because these companies had just gone out of business. It wasn't that they stopped, they just went out of business. And of course, I'm fat, dumb, and happy with no cell service, so I don't know what happened in those 3 days. But, Armageddon took place. So the reality of it is, what we're having now isn't an economic-induced fall. It is an uncertainty fall by something that we can't see, that we don't know where it is. We don't know how big the problem is, and we may never know how big the problem is until it's over.
Great point.
That's the problem.
Great point. Rick, how about you? What's going to happen to the mortgage industry today, tomorrow, 5 years?
Well, Kevin ended on the point I was going to make, Brian, is that we're just not going to know what the extent of this is until it's over. Hindsight's going to show it to us. And there's been a lot of great material that's been hitting LinkedIn and hitting Facebook that we can learn from. Just yesterday, Barry Habib got on with Andrew Berman and Frank and Brian, Ryan Hills, Clayton Collins, and they all talked to Dr. Mike Roizen. He's the director of the Cleveland Clinic down in your area, Brian.
Absolutely.
And a really, really interesting discussion about what's going on right now and what we're seeing. But what the long-term impact is, it's just impossible to say at this point. All we can say for sure is that everything that I've seen in the marketplace so far has been very intelligent on the part of the industry and even government for dealing with it in these early days.
I'll share this, guys. Earlier this week, I was on a conference call with a number of mortgage lenders. MBA was represented, and there's a lot of these going on right now. Folks kind of talking about how do we keep business as usual when there is nothing usual at all about the world we're in today. And one representative of a lender mentioned, as a pretty good sized lender, said, guys, right now our world's changing by the hour. We're getting information on top of information. We're not even getting time to process it. The word exponential comes to mind for me. Everything's growing, and it's not meant to be any kind of a viral reference either. I'm just in terms of the impact of the virus. So I'm going to take it towards the silver lining. What good, if any, comes out? And I'm going to start us off here. Rick, I think you'll want to mention something about this, but maybe, and this isn't the way we wanted it, but maybe this is the impetus to finally knock down the barriers to the e-mortgage that we deal at the government level and otherwise. What do you guys think? Is that, or what other good could come out of this?
Well, I'll hit that first. We just saw a Senate bill hit the floor yesterday, trying to make remote online notarization legal in all 50 states. I don't know how far that's going to get, but at least now the bill is written. So now we have a model that the states can use. I think it's a big step forward.
All right. Kevin, where's the silver lining, if anywhere?
Well, what comes to my mind is the unauthorized practice of law. And the reality of it is, when you can't go to an attorney's office to close, when you have to do things remotely, how would that affect the unauthorized practice of law? And I think remote signings are good. I think remote notary is good. I do think that one of the things that will come of this is that we'll all develop new ways of doing things. But I keep trying to think of what is going to be the unintended consequences of everything when we get to a different normal.
Great point.
Or will the normal that we once knew be the normal we know now? And
Great
so, but I would think that from a mortgage lending standpoint, remote notary, e-sign, the unauthorized practice of law, those are the things that have to be addressed to make that successful. And then you have to have the buy-in of all 50 states where, like the great state of Texas, we have some very archaic processes when it comes to remote signings. And the reality of it is you have to bring those states around to the thinking that this is okay.
Great point, Kevin. And again, for all of you out here watching this, be well, stay safe. We'll continue on. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's going to be with us for a while. So we aren't going to be able to avoid it. But for now, we're going to kind of move on to one of our regular segments, On with the Pod, and let's talk to Kevin and ask him, are you kidding me?
Well, my segment today, Brian, really focuses on one item and one item only, and that's market volatility. So there's an article that was written by, I believe his name is Matthew Green. And I've read this guy on and off for a number of years. He's not a reactionary type reporter. He's very thoughtful about what he writes, and he thinks through it, and he makes very good points. And other than being maybe a little wordy from time to time, he writes a good article. He wrote an article yesterday about the most volatile day ever in mortgages. And the article was extremely long for him. I mean, it usually doesn't write these lengthy type of articles. And the thing that got my attention was how many times he put something in bold capital letters. So he was really trying to make a point. But I think the silver lining in all of this is that when I was reading this, I had two emotions. One was I was just struck with fear. Because even in my long career, I have seen some really crazy days. What he described was something I had never experienced myself until yesterday. But the other thing is how can we, the thing I keep going back to is what can we do to improve? What can we do to grow from this? What can we do? And so after I read it a second time. And to me, it's just like, okay, while I'm not a great Green Bay Packer fan at all, as you can tell, I do come to think of what Aaron Rodgers once said when they were 1-2 after 3 games. And he told the press to RELAX. And I think that's just what we need to do.
Outstanding, Kevin. You're right. It's I don't want to use the word panic just yet, but it's been a very strange week or so since a lot of us have been told to, stay at home and whatnot, and we've seen runs on food. It's in some ways it's like the very short-term aftermath of 9/11, except maybe on steroids. It's been, all three of us lived through that, and that was traumatic enough in many ways. But in terms of the markets or the impact on everyday life, this even puts that. This outdoes it, and but the only way to get through it's together and keep our heads about us for sure. So a very relevant piece. Rick, did you want to add anything there?
No, I think that's good. In final thoughts, I'll talk a little bit about the leader's role in this, and this is the time when leaders need to step up and allay those fears and help people relax. And well, just like Kevin says, that's why he's a leader, and that's why he's with us. So well done, Kevin.
Amen. So true. All right, let's move on now to our mortgage headline roundup. And we've only got one for you this week, and it's from our friend at National Mortgage News, Bonnie Sinek. It was published on March 19th, and it's called Why Servicers May Need a Loss MIT Standard That Goes Beyond HAMP. Now, it is behind a paywall, but I think in this case, it is a good article. And if you are a subscriber or you can get a subscription, it's well worth the read. But here's two things that I'm not even hearing about yet. Now, by the time you see this at home, maybe this is now a top story, but we haven't talked about default and servicing as a top story in a long, long time in this industry. And I think there's this headline alone gives us two things to talk about. Now, let's start with servicing and default. Back around 2009, 2010, 2011, that's all we talked about, right? Default servicing, foreclosure, whatnot, REO. Couldn't go anywhere without hearing about REO. And that segment in our industry has been decimated recently. Let's be honest, there haven't been a lot of defaults and foreclosures. Now, it's early days for us in this virus, but it seems quite possible, depending on the level of government intervention and mitigation, that our servicing industry is about to get a real test. So my question to the peanut gallery, are we ready for it? Are we ready for this tidal wave?
So I'll hit that first, Brian. One of my clients, full disclosure, is in that business, provides software for default servicing, and they've been ready. They've always been ready. The difference here, though, is in definition, I think. Just because Bank of America says you can miss payments, just because the federal government says that you can miss payments on certain rules, doesn't mean that you're not actually missing payments. So even though there may be no foreclosures, there may be no dings to the credit, servicers still have to get these borrowers back on track eventually. So it is going to be a matter of default servicing, even if we don't call it that. And while this happens, somebody is probably going to be out some money. Is it the servicer? Somebody's going to be left holding the bag. It'll be interesting to see who it is.
Kevin, what do you think, sir?
I think Rick makes a very good point, because at the end of the day, you take the anatomy of a loan. The reason why servicers service isn't because of the one loan that they get to make $13 on. It's because of the 100,000 loans they get to make $13 on. But when nobody's paying them, that $13 isn't being paid. You go further down the road, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac isn't receiving their end. Ginnie Mae's not receiving their end. Now, again, while those entities are government sponsored at this point and government endorsed, you're really relying on the full force of the federal government to keep the system propped up. And so while I appreciate the fact that we're taking the position of no foreclosure activity, a moratorium on that, may not even report late pays and all that, because people are losing jobs, not because of anything they're doing. There is going to be a void in the cash flow. And no matter how much the federal government wants to prop us up, they can only prop us up to some degree. They're not going to fund these loans every month and make payments for all these for these servicers. So you could see some real mark-to-mark accounting issues coming up, which was an article I read yesterday that seems to be some concern. So I think I think the industry is starting to look at, okay, this is great. We're not going to foreclose on anybody, but what are we going to do for these 120 days when we're not getting, when we're not getting 40% of the payments we normally collect?
Well, Kevin, you bring something up there, and I want to dive a little deeper into it. You talked about the fact that there's an interesting kind of, I don't know if dichotomy is the word I'm looking for right now, but there's a conundrum we're going to be running into here. Where is the line between providing needed assistance? I mean, so many people in America have had their income put on pause, basically, and they don't have any say in the matter. This is by government decree. Okay. These folks don't have the money to pay the mortgage. So where's the line, however, with forbearance, payment forgiveness, deferral, whatever? versus the flip side, when the mortgage lender isn't bringing that money in, even if it's for a month or 2 months, and it's not going down the line, that's a lot of damage to a major economic sector. Now you have layoffs in the mortgage industry all of a sudden. I mean, this is a massive massive employer as well. So where should the line? And of course, if I had the answer, I'd spurt it out right now. But I don't think anyone has a true answer. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Where's that line between assisting the consumer and keeping an important part of the economy going?
So what I'm about to say does not mean that I'm a relative of Bernie Sanders. But my overall views for most of my life has always been on a very conservative pathway. However, I'm also old enough to remember the stories of what my grandparents would talk about during the Depression. You know, how my grandfather bought the family farm during the Depression because he had 12 brothers and sisters that had no place to live. And so everybody moved out to the farm during that time frame, and they, grew the family food. We had cattle, and that's how the family survived during the time period of the Depression. And then once the Depression was over with, the family dispersed and went their own various ways. I have no interest in going back to the family farm, but I just don't. And that's not because I don't love it out there, because I do. But I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is this. People are losing their jobs not because of their performance, not because their employers are bad managers, and not because the companies that lead them are terrible companies. They're losing their jobs because we have states like California mandating everybody stay home. Can you imagine that today might be the only day that you can drive in Los Angeles and get to where you're going on time? So the reality of it is that's the norm right now. And so as far as I'm concerned, I would be completely okay with the whole thought that for the next 6 months, everything's on pause. Those payments go to the end of the line, and at the end of 6 months, then we deal with the fallout from there. So, and because Fannie, Freddie, I mean, this is probably one of the better things that have happened when the federal government stepped in and took over the GSEs. I mean, they own them now. They still, they're still partners. So they can do this. They can make this part of their trillion or $1.5 trillion survival package to keep us going and put all these payments at the end. Yes, the mortgage servicers in between are going to suffer. However, they can plow something in there to help keep them afloat. Maybe eliminate reporting for the next 6 months. Just, hey, let's just put it all on pause because there's nothing going on. And so while I think that's probably a pretty radical view, when it's not anyone's fault, I think sometimes radical is the only answer.
Strange times, Kevin. Strange times. Rick, what do you think?
What's going through my mind is probably not going to be really very popular. I mean, right now we have a lot of people working from home. They're adding value to other people's lives from their homes. But we've got millions of other people that are home because they can't pour coffee in a cup that somebody normally would drive somewhere to buy. Now, 100 years ago, when people were selling apples out of carts, and they lost that job, that was really serious. And it was serious. And it is serious if somebody in a normal retail job today, delivering burgers, or something like that, suddenly can't work. But it raises the question, in a society as advanced as ours, is that where we want our people adding value? Or is that it just seems like 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, why were they trying to keep making buggy whips when there were no horses on the street? Is this a wake-up call that we need to change the way we structure the basics of our capitalist society? I don't know. It's running through my mind, Brian.
That's a pretty deep thought. A lot of a lot of deep thoughts we're going to have in the coming days. We're going to find conservatives calling for bailouts. We're going to find what we call liberals calling for restraint, and I think we're going to have some strange bedfellows as we work through the solutions. But and it's safe to say we haven't faced this kind of a threat in a long time.
Well, I'd like to add this one piece to what Rick had to say. I mean, let's think about supply chain for a moment. Supply chain was disrupted because all of this started in China. And when China went to a complete lockdown, our supply chain got upset. And as this has moved around the globe and really kind of came to the United States in the latter part of the movement, they're ready to open up the supply chain and we're shut down. I think one of the lessons that this is teaching us is that we probably need to have more of that supply chain back in the United States. But with that, we all have to recognize that a bottle of Tylenol might go from $6.50 a bottle to $16.50 a bottle. But the reality of it is we have a large portion of our economy that is service orientated. And we need to get it more into, I'm not going to say a manufacturing economy because that sounds very archaic, but a supply chain economy where we are first as suppliers, and then countries like China and Taiwan and other places around the world are our secondary suppliers, not our primary source. And I think that what's really going to change in this process, the smart people who do supply chain is going to take a long, hard look at this and ask themselves this question: what could we have done better? And what do we need to do going forward to not have this happen again?
Great points, both of you. Again, some serious times ahead. We'll all get through it together, and we'll keep coming back to some of these thoughts. But even here at the end of days, my iPad is running out of juice again. So for all of you out there, be well, stay safe. Check with us again next week. And Kevin and Rick, as always, thank you for being with us. And Mr. Grant, why don't you go ahead and take us home?
Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you got something out of today's program besides fear and uncertainty. I'm sure there was a fair amount of that in today's program, but you would expect that in a time of crisis. But remember that crisis is a call to leaders. It's a call for leadership because leadership is the antidote to crisis. It's the only thing that can allay fear, pull teams together, help them move in a direction that will actually make things better. That's what we need our leaders to do. If you're one of them, and you probably are, wish you luck in that. Let us know if we can help. See you next time.